entrance to the dining room used to be only this squared off archway, but back in the 1890s, when the church decided to change from all walnut to golden oak at Governor Lubbock's decision and urging, these doors, solid walnut, were left begging and nobody wanted them. They were much taller than they are now because the church door was very large compared with this opening. Anyway, Dr. Smoot brought these home since nobody else wanted them, and they have been the doorways to the dining room ever since. Another sort of inherited piece, using that word symbolically, is this china cabinet. It happened when the Richardson home was over here to our east. That house also had to be demolished in time, and the children of that family, grown of course, 2 daughters and a son, came to Austin to take from the house everything they wanted before having it torn down. And when they had taken all that they wanted, they came over to visit us, and we had been lifelong friends. And they said they wanted us, all 4 of us in the family at that time, to come over and select from the pieces left whatever we would like to have. And so different ones of us chose different parts of the furnishings there. It happened that Mrs. Richardson had been good to me as a child and gave me cookies and cake and pie and so forth from some special china she had, Staffordshire china. So I chose the Staffordshire china. And when I started to bring it home, as each person was bringing home whatever they had chosen, the daughters of the family said, "No, we'll bring you the china." And I said, "Well, I can carry it." And they said, "No, we will bring it to you. We have some other large pieces to bring." So when they came, they brought this whole china cabinet, not with any of the crystal that's in it now, but it was so lovely of them to give me the whole china cabinet as well as the china I had chosen. Actually, the crystal that's in this cabinet now was in my mother's family, and it fits very nicely into this china cabinet. You see, when my mother and father married, my mother had a sizable amount of furniture from her old home up in Milam County, but my father said, "Don't bring any furniture here. This house is already full and loaded, and don't bring any more." And so my mother said, "Well, I'll just have to change with my sisters then." And she gave them most of her furniture, not every bit of it, but some. And they gave her some crystal and china to replace her furniture. Moving on around the room, we see another piece over here. It's a hutch, most people call it. We call it a china cabinet. It was originally a milk safe and had screen doors at the front so that the milk could be put in there and kept reasonably cool out on the porch. But somewhere along the way, my father decided to scratch the old enamel on it, which was white, and he found walnut underneath. So he decided that white enamel had to come off, and he made it then into this hutch. You remember he liked to work with his hands, even on furniture. This piece of furniture had a real experience, a real adventure. When Dr. Smoot and family moved to Austin in 1876, there was no way they could bring all of their furniture with them. So he asked different members of the church and family up there to let him park some pieces with them until he could get situated here in Austin, at which time he would send for his furniture. So he parked this sideboard with an elder in the Presbyterian church up there. After this house was almost ready to be moved into, Dr. Smoot wrote to these different people up in Bowling Green and asked that they put the furniture, all of it, on the train. He would pay for all the expenses, of course, and then it would arrive here in time to come into this house as it was finished. When this piece was parked with the elder, it had long legs underneath what it is now. Legs like this were underneath the whole of the piece so that this stood up in the air. It was a highboy. And when it arrived in Austin, its legs were gone and it was down on the floor like this. So Grandfather wrote back to the man who had kept it and said, "What happened to the legs on my sideboard?" After quite a long time, the elder wrote back and said, "Frankly, Dr. Smoot, we thought when you went to Texas we would never hear from you again. That's such a wild place out there that we thought we'd never hear from you again. And my wife, who is a short person, could not reach the top of this sideboard when it had the long legs. So I cut off the legs so she could reach the top of it." He never explained what he had done with the legs, and they never came back. But this poor thing lost its legs. Antique people have said if it still had its legs to make it a highboy, it would be a much more valuable piece of furniture than it is. The silver you see here, especially this silver pitcher, which is thermalized, by the way. It's lined with a kind of thermal protection to keep the contents either hot or cold. This was given to Dr. and Mrs. Smoot by the church when they left Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was a memorial gift, a gift of thanks and gratitude for what they had done while there. It's quite unusual to have it thermalized from that early date. Here we have the other sideboard, the new sideboard we call it, which was bought here in Austin after the family came because they quickly found that they needed a little more furniture than they had brought with them. So this one, which is a much more elaborate piece, obviously, was bought here. I think this was bought at the Kreisel furniture store. I know some of the other pieces in the house, which they bought here, were selected at the Kreisel furniture store. Just everything really has a story behind it, but I think I'll finish the collection in this room by talking about my mother's school bell. She was a teacher out in country schools for a good many years before she and my father married. And so she, as teacher of all the classes, way out there somewhere in the boondocks, had to control those children. And she had this overgrown bell to do the job, and it really did the job. It could be heard a long way off, you see. So this bell has special memories. And as I said, just almost anything else you touch here as well does have.
Plate.
Oh yes, over here we have a funny story. From the time my parents married until I was a sophomore at the University of Texas, we kept university students here with us. It was a rather unusual situation, not an ordinary boarding house at all. You see, my mother had taught for 7 years in West Texas, Stamford, before marrying my father. And that first Christmas after my parents married, they wrote Christmas cards to the people out in Stamford, mainly to the ranchers whose families my mother had taught, saying that she was married and living here in Austin now and so forth, giving all the news. Well, the ranchers wrote back and said, since you're married now and you have a large house in Austin where the University of Texas is, we would like to ask about making arrangements to have our daughters come and live with you. We don't want our daughters staying in any of those sinful dormitories. So we would like for them to come live with you. and you can continue seeing after them. Well, there were just a few at a time, and fortunately my father enjoyed young people as my mother did, so here they came. And they were living here in the house at the time I was born. Well, at this time, her sisters up in Milam County, who had young children and those getting ready for university, said, well, if you can take all those people from West Texas to stay with you, you certainly ought to take your own nieces and nephews to stay. And so here came a group of nieces and nephews, my cousins, and this went on year after year until, as I said, the last one came when I was a sophomore here at the University of Texas. But the point of the plate is that one of the youngsters from Cameron was a little bit hard to control. My mother always made it clear to the parents that she would feel responsible for these youngsters here, and that she would require them to do what she felt was right and so forth, and the parents were entirely glad for her to do that. Anyway, this young man found it awfully hard to follow rules, and he was always breaking out one way or the other. Well, they had a food warming arrangement, mostly served by a candle underneath, and they had a special covering or plate which was to be used on the top. And my mother made clear to them that they should never put anything on top of this food warmer except the proper covering, not anything else. But this young man chose to put this pewter plate on top, and in no time he had melted out the middle of the plate, making a general mess over everything as well as running the plate. Well, Mother was, of course, very much annoyed by it, but she looked upon it as an opportunity to teach him the importance of obedience. So she tacked this plate onto the wall like that so that it would show all of the melted part, and then she seated him on the opposite side of the dining room table so that he would, while seated at every meal, have to face this plate. And if he didn't look at it often enough, she would remind him that his plate was over there waiting to be looked at. And I have a feeling that he never forgot what his disobedience had caused. Later, I decided to add that cup. I didn't have any place to put the cup, and I decided to cover up the melted hole. But there are many wonderful stories about these young people who lived with us. I remember them so well from my earliest days because I just was right here like a rag doll in the middle of all these people and had a wonderful time. They were great to grow up with. So that's just one of the stories. There are lots more.